Hi, and welcome to the And1 Analytics Podcast. I'm your host, Alex West. Thanks for tuning in to the inaugural podcast. First time I've done this. It's been something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Finally going to sit down and take the time. Started a website this week. Started a podcast this week. It's just been a really big week at the West household, working on things related to NBA statistics, player analysis, game analysis, that kind of thing. So if it's something you're interested in, please subscribe, tune in to the podcast. I'm going to try to keep them coming at a rate about one a week. Today I'm going to start off doing things by myself, just to sort of ease you into it. And then later this week, and into next week, going to have some guests on. I'm not 100% certain who they're going to be just yet, but in talks with a lot of high-profile free agents to come in and talk to us about the things that matter, teams that they care about, and the sort of analysis that they bring to the table. But that'll be something that we'll get into a little bit later in the week. Today, we're going to do a podcast that I like to call Numbers That Matter. I really wanted one of those graphic things. The audio things like they have on ESPN, where it's Numbers That Matter. But I didn't get that done. So anyway, Numbers That Matter. So there were 3 games yesterday, Sunday. 3 really important games. 2 series tied up 2-2 with Boston and Washington. Houston and San Antonio all tied at 2. And the Toronto Raptors getting swept by the Cleveland Cavaliers yesterday in a somewhat unexciting way. That was not the best. The game was exciting, but the series itself left a lot to be desired. And then the Warriors and the Jazz play tonight. So all 4, we're going to touch on all 4, talk about some of the numbers that are making a big difference. And let's start with Cleveland and Toronto. Like I said, not a tremendously exciting series. Sorry, Raptors fans, but and you really didn't. I know a lot of people had said that they thought it was going to be exciting, that there was going to be a lot of chance that Toronto could win this series, but there really wasn't. And it's one of those things that we do this every year. We try to talk ourselves as NBA fans into, LeBron's team is susceptible. They're not playing great defense in March when they're in game 78 and they're not locked in. And it's like, yeah, they did not play well down the stretch after the All-Star break, but you knew that LeBron's teams were going to tighten up, and they've won 8 straight, and all of a sudden they look like the juggernaut that they are, getting ready to tear a path to the NBA Finals. And the number that matters in this one, the ridiculous number that matters, is 48.1%. LeBron James is shooting 48% from 3. He's created a ton of opportunities for other guys as well. That bench unit with Korver and Darren Williams and Channing Frye, where it's just LeBron and the bench mob of shooters, has been incredibly efficient at bombing threes. It's one of those times where, and you don't get to see this tremendously often, but it's one of those times where you get to see the real basketball IQ of LeBron James, how he picks his spots. He doesn't have to score all the time. He doesn't have to drive the lane. But when he does, he creates these opportunities for guys. You got Korver and Frye, guys who are historically great shooters. And LeBron has just been so efficient and so effective. And you feel like he's at 75% effort at this point. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that makes you understand, this really is one of 5 best players of all time. Here's a guy who's coming in the playoffs, second round of the playoffs, against a team that a lot of people gave an opportunity to beat them. He turns it on to 75%, shoots 57% from the floor, shoots 48% from 3, dishes out assist after assist. He was the second highest assist person in the series behind Kyrie Irving, and just demolishes Toronto, really sending a message to the winner of Boston, Washington, that LeBron wants to get back to the finals. He wants to win another one. He wants to beat this Warriors team that everyone says is better. And so I think that a couple of days of rest, they're going to be ready to go on and face the winner. They got about a week out of this. The second number that matters, two numbers that matter. Kyrie Irving played 137 minutes, and Kevin Love only played 118. Their guys are getting rest even while they play. Throughout the season, you play a lot of games back-to-back. You play a lot of games on 2 days rest. And it's so important for coaches like Tyronn Lue to give these guys rest as they play. And I know rest has become this hot-button issue, but when you see something that's happened, like the way LeBron has played in the past few weeks, the way he's played in the playoffs, you understand that he's dunking lefty off the backboard. There's just a huge, tremendous difference in what rest does for these guys. And to get to rest Kyrie, to get to rest Kevin Love in the game, not playing fourth quarters, finishing the game off without the help of their second and third best player, you understand what that means when you go into the next series. And you have guys that are fresh legs. You have Kyrie Irving, a guy who excels in ISO opportunities with fresh legs, so that he can take guys off the dribble, so that he can shoot threes, so that he can do all the things that he needs to do at the most efficient level. And I think playing 137 minutes in 4 games, plus a week of rest, with Love playing 118 minutes with that week of rest, they're going to be very, very well prepared. They're locked in. Their defense has looked better, a lot better in this series. They've given up, in the Raptors series, they gave up 105, 103, 94, and 102, all of which is below their 106.9 points per game average that they gave up in the regular season. They have the 4th best defensive rating among teams in the playoffs at 105.9. And what those numbers mean when it comes to like pace and offensive rating and defensive rating, when you hear a number like defensive rating 105.9, what that means is points per 100 possessions. So if there were 100 possessions in a game, which is on average about what there are, how many points would a team score if they continue to play at this rate? And during the regular season, their rate was 108, so they've knocked off about 2.1 points, which is a big deal, which may not sound like a tremendously big deal, but it is a big deal to really start to control the flow of the game. And they played at a much slower pace in the playoffs than they were playing later in the regular season. They've slowed it down to about 90. Their pace is about 94 possessions a game, I want to say. That's something I may have just said off the top of my head and not been right, but it was much slower than what it had been late in the regular season when they were really they're really playing a lot faster. And I think the slowdown is something that they've been coached to do, that they've been encouraged to do. They play slower, they play methodically, they value each possession. When you got a guy like LeBron, or when you got a guy like Kyrie who can create shots for other people as well as create shots for themselves, playing at a slower pace, playing in a half court is a way to sort of assert your style of play. And if you go back to Game 5 of the NBA Finals last year, that was a big deal. That was the playing. They really imposed their will after Draymond Green went out, both from a intestinal fortitude kind of way. They played with more guts. They played very inspired, but they also imposed their will in terms of pace and slowed the game down. Because you have LeBron James, the best player in the game, because you have Kyrie Irving, a guy who can get shots, you really just start to control the flow. And even still, even with the slower pace, they've scored a lot of points. They've 114.5 points, which is the most in the playoffs. And that's Cleveland. That's what they're going to do. They're going to put up points. They're going to outscore you, and they're going to stop you when they have to. And I think that's something that they've really cleaned up. They've done a pretty good job. And now let's talk about Toronto a little bit. Total opposite end of the spectrum. Toronto is sort of at a break point in their franchise. Kyle Lowry's a free agent. DeMar DeRozan just finished signing his big deal last season, I think. But they're going to be sort of in a position where they have to make some decisions, where Masai Ujiri, their general manager, has to make some decisions about what to do going forward. Do you want to give Kyle Lowry a $200 million max when he's 31 years old? He has been hurt 2 of the last 3 playoffs and missed games or been in limited effectiveness. And do you want to give him $200 million? Is this a team that can compete? Because if they give Lowry the max, they're going to be all other things staying the same. If they give Lowry the max, they're going to be well into the luxury cap, and the luxury tax is not something you want to be into if you're not a competitor. You want to be. Owners always say the same thing, that they're willing to pay the luxury tax, provided that they have a contender, and that's not what Toronto is right now. Even adding P.J. Tucker, adding Serge Ibaka, they're not a contender. They're built on an undersized point guard who can shoot and who is their best player, but definitely has trouble staying on the court from time to time. And then they're also built on the back of DeMar DeRozan, who had these great 30-point outbursts in the playoffs, but also had these 6-point things where he missed 8 shots and he shot 6% from 3. He's just a 90s scorer, just a volume scorer, a guy who scores a lot in the mid-range, who doesn't shoot threes, who can't shoot threes, who's sort of a spacing nightmare. And so you have this problem where you're looking in forward and you say, well, do I want to pay Kyle Lowry $200 million? Or do I want to start to rebuild? And if you start to rebuild, does that mean that you're going to have to ship Ibaka out? Are you going to have to ship DeRozan out? How big of a rebuild are you talking about? And I think we're going to have a Raptors fan come on the podcast and sort of do a Raptors post-mortem sometime this week. Hopefully that'll be something that we can get into, because to me that Toronto is one of the more interesting stories in the NBA. They have been perpetually almost there, and they've just never quite gotten there. And so it'll be interesting to see what path they choose going forward. Are they going to blow it up, or are they going to, keep at it? Blowing it up, which is something I'll cover one day, has just become this idea that all NBA fans think is the panacea of the NBA. Like, oh, let's just blow it up. Let's blow the Clippers up. Let's blow up the Raptors. And it's something that's much easier said than done. You're not putting them on the trading block in NBA 2K and seeing what offers come back. It's much harder to make those moving pieces work and what you're going to get back. And so that's something we'll talk about later in the offseason as the games get a little fewer, more sparse, because there's just not a lot to talk about in August. So maybe that's something we'll get into later, but that's the Cleveland-Toronto series. It is over. Cleveland has a week off before they face the winner of Boston-Washington, the series that I have a vested interest in as a Celtics fan, and has not been tremendously exciting for the past 2 games for me. But the number of this series, let's talk about the number that matters. It is 26-0. Yesterday, Washington went on a 26-0 run, largely on the back of turnovers and errant plays by the Celtics, and then their own offensive brilliance with John Wall. They played so tremendously well in the third quarter. After being down early, they really played very well. And to go on a 26-0 run, you get these ideas about like what that means. 26-0. It just means that they dominated a game. No team is going to win if they take a 26-0 run, and that's what happened to the Celtics yesterday. And it's been a series of runs. Washington has the 26-0 run yesterday, the 22-0 run in game 2, 16-0 run in game 1. There have just been parts of the game in like 3 and 4 and 5 minute blocks where the Celtics just become anemic on offense. Isaiah can't create efficiently. He can't get to the basket. And when that happens, that's when you see these big runs, when they start to limit the effectiveness of Isaiah Thomas. And that's something, after the big outburst in game 2, the 53-point game, that's something that they've just done so fantastically, is just negate Isaiah's ability to get to the rim and to create efficient corner threes for the Celtics that they thrive on. And when that happens, you start to see, even if it's not, these historic 0-point runs. If you watch the Celtics all year, you've seen these points where they get scored out 22-5. They get outscored, 15-0, 15-2. These little things happen, and it's just sort of predicated on the back of not being able to create offensive efficiency. And that's a real problem for them going forward. whether it's in the rest of these playoffs, which it will be, or in the future, that there's just not a secondary creator. Horford plays well. Bradley, Crowder, they have this sort of second best player by committee thing going. And it works out a lot of the time, as you see. I mean, they got the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. But what it comes down to is a lot of times that if they can't get Isaiah going, they can't win games because they just don't have a second person who can create their own shot. A lot of the offense, even Horford, even Crowder, Bradley, a lot of their success offensively is predicated on the creation of Isaiah Thomas, sucking a second defender in, sucking a third defender in, creating space around the perimeter for guys to shoot, and if they don't shoot, they get a secondary drive and then start to move the ball really efficiently. You'll see a lot of times Isaiah will drive the lane. He'll bring in a defender. He'll kick it out. The second person will drive, and then they'll kick it out, and that's where they'll get the three, is on a secondary offensive angle. And when that is not happening, when Isaiah's not getting paint penetration, the Celtics just have a ton of problems getting points on the board. And they turn the ball over, which leads me to my second stat. 34 points off turnovers in Game 4. A lot of it during that 26-0 run. 34 points. And the Wizards have done a great job. Besides their 34 points yesterday, they had 17 points off turnovers in Game 1, 19 in Game 2, 12 in Game 3. They've got 82 points for the series off turnovers, which is a pretty large amount. I mean, given the high score rate of this series, it doesn't sound like a lot, except for yesterday. But those kind of points, those kind of free baskets where turnovers are created at the top of the key by guys like John Wall, Bradley Beal, those are really important in tempo and pace and being able to push the scoring out to a place where the Wizards want to be, because they want to be in that 110 range. That's where they get a lot of their work done. It's if they can get in the plus 110, score higher than 110 points, and you see, the winner of this series has scored in the high 120s most of the time, and that's really where the Wizards want to be. And John Wall has just been beyond phenomenal. It's unbelievable to me how well he's played. He leads the playoffs in minutes, points, field goals made, field goals attempted, assists, turnovers, steals. He's just been this one-man wrecking crew. And the Celtics they do have a good perimeter defenders, but John Wall is just the old good offense is better than good defense adage. He just does so many things so well. Yesterday, he had 27 points, 12 assists, 5 steals. He just creating for the Wizards at such a high level, and the Wizards haven't been getting a lot of secondary creation. Yesterday, the Bradley Beal finally got started, and I think that's a big deal. I think Beal has just been a non-factor in the first 3 games. To get him going in Game 4 is such a huge, huge advantage. Because, like I was talking about the Celtics not having a second scorer, the Wizards do. And that Bradley Beal, when he is playing to his potential, is a guy who you can run your offense through. And I think that helps. That helps the Wizards be able to play at such a high level, to score a lot of points, and to give John Wall some sort of off-ball possessions that he needs. They limited his minutes in both of the last 2 games at home. He's down. John Wall was playing in the 40s. He's down to the 30s in the last 2 games. He played 36 minutes yesterday. And getting Beal going sort of helps that as well. He gets some on-court rest where the offense is not so heavily on his shoulders when Bradley Beal can score or create his own shot. And that's something that has been important for the Wizards, to make sure Bradley Beal's involved, and will be important going forward if they win this series or in the rest of this series. There are 3 games left, and having Bradley Beal, having him play at a high level is super important. And so I think that's going to be a big factor going forward, and how much the 2 things that I think are really important going forward in this series are how much can Bradley Beal be involved, because John Wall's going to get he's going to get his numbers, and he's going to be beyond amazing. And how much can they get Bradley Beal involved, particularly on the road where he tends to play worse. And then for the Celtics, it's how much offense can they get out of these second guys? How much can Ken Crowder, Ken Bradley, Jaylen Brown, Gerald Green, Al Horford, all of the guys, where's that second 20-point scorer coming from? And I think it's probably going to be a 7-game series. I really do. I really just think that it's going to come down to Celtics win Game 5, Wizards win Game 6, and then we just have one game for all the marbles, which will be good. We haven't had a tremendously exciting playoff, so it's nice when some of these series are very exciting. And that's all from Boston, Washington. Let's talk about Houston and San Antonio. This has been the other series that has actually been interesting. Golden State, Utah has sort of been interesting in a tertiary way, in that the games have been interesting in themselves because Utah has not played poorly. They've just been overwhelmed. But we'll get to them in a minute. San Antonio and Houston, what can you say? It's just been this phenomenal series, but none of the games have been phenomenal. It's just sort of been blowout, and it's tied 2-2. Here we are. And I think that, and I touch on this a little bit in the column that I wrote this week, the three-pointer has become this mathematical thing that we're all in love with, and it's created games like this where the games are further apart on paper than they actually are. You get 2 or 3 shots to fall here, then it's all of a sudden a blowout. You're up by 15, and I think that's what's happened in this series. And that's the number that matters here. The number that matters in this series is Houston's 3-point percentage. In the win in Game 1, they shot 44%. In the loss in Game 2, they shot 32%. In the loss in Game 3, they shot 30%. The win in Game 4, they shot 44%. And I think that's the number that matters, is what is Houston shooting percentage going forward? Because their whole game is predicated on that, on the excellence of James Harden, how he creates these shots for people. But at the end of the day, are the shots going down? And when the shots go down, Houston wins, and they win big. And when they don't go down, they get blown out. And that's what the three-pointers become in the league, is this measuring stick of if it's falling, you're going to get good shots, you're going to win games walking away. And if it's not falling, you're going to get your ass kicked. And that's what happened. Yesterday, Houston shots fell. They were down 2-0 at the beginning of the game, and then they just opened it up, and they never looked back. The last time they trailed was 2-0. They led the rest of the way yesterday. And I think that's really important for Houston. Houston is a play-from-ahead team. They don't play tremendously well from behind, and something I've noticed is they like to, when they're playing well, they're very much in the flow of their offense. James Harden gets in, he creates, guys don't rush shots look good, they come from open shooters. And then when they're down, the shots are rushed. You'll see James Harden take a shot with 17 seconds on the shot clock at the top of the key, and you just go, oh, that's a terrible shot. And then that's what happens when they're down. So for Houston, I think playing ahead is a much more important factor than for San Antonio, who probably is a little more seasoned. You say that about the Spurs, but then when you start to look at their roster, there's not as much playoff experience as there has been in guys that matter. Guys like Jonathan Simmons, Dwayne Dedmon. You still have Manu. You don't have Tony Parker anymore, but you still got Manu, you got Paul, you got Kawhi. And then LaMarcus has his fair share of playoff experience. But there are some guys in there that don't have as much. But for Houston, there's a little bit less playoff experience, just younger guys in general. And I think playing from ahead is super important for them, so that they sort of get that feeling of being ahead and playing well and playing in their rhythm. For the Spurs, LaMarcus Aldridge had a terrible Game 1. He had 4 points and 6 rebounds, but has come on a little bit more, and that's very important for them. Second option scoring has just been sort of the theme of this podcast. You got to have a second scorer in the playoffs. You got to get buckets, and LaMarcus has come on a little bit. He had 15 and 9 in Game 2, 26 and 7 in Game 3, 16 and 5 in Game 4. So you see that there is a big difference in wins and losses. Whether that's the only factor, obviously it's not the only factor, but that's a big factor for the Spurs, is when they get good production out of LaMarcus Aldridge, they win games. And he just hasn't been what they want him to be, despite playing pretty well. I mean, LaMarcus Aldridge has just been a guy that you say, yeah, he plays pretty well. He's 18-7 guy, and that's what he's become. But the Spurs need a little bit more out of LaMarcus. They need him to play a little bit better. They need more 26-7s and fewer 4-6s, because those 26-7s just create space for everybody. Because LaMarcus is a great pick and pop shooter. He is a 4 or a 5 that can create spacing, particularly with Gasol, who's a great low post player. You get a little inside-outside game. So him playing well sort of opens up a lot more options for San Antonio than what they had before. And I think that going forward, you're going to see them use him a lot more in the fourth, particularly in Game 5. I think you'll see a lot of LaMarcus Aldridge in the first quarter, a concerted effort to get LaMarcus Aldridge going. And if they can do that, you'll see a lot more flow in the offense, a lot more things open up for San Antonio. And the other person that's been really important for San Antonio, besides obviously Kawhi, what's the point in even talking about Kawhi? He's a basketball playing robot, is Jonathan Simmons. Jonathan Simmons off the bench has given the Spurs a spark. He's played really well. He's become pretty effective in the spots that they use him in. He had 11 points in Game 1, 14, and then 7, and then 17 yesterday. So you're going to want to see a lot more points out of Jonathan Simmons. You want him in that 12 to 15 range, so that you know he's effective. He's scoring against bench units. He's getting the kind of points that they really need. So that's Houston, San Antonio. Game 5 is tomorrow night. Yeah, Game 5 is tomorrow night in San Antonio. I think San Antonio probably wins, but what do I know? And then, so that'll be a big, important game. Game 5's always important in 2-2 series, because ask the guys on ESPN, the winner of Game 5 wins the series 187% of the time, or something, whatever. So last series, Golden State, Utah, Game 4 tonight. And there's not a tremendous amount to say about this series. I don't have a ridiculous insight besides Golden State's a really great team. That's what they are. And sort of to quantify that, the importance number for this series is 8. 8 is the number of minutes that Golden State has been behind in 3 games. They were behind for a little bit of the third quarter of Game 3 and have been behind a basket maybe in one game, but they've been behind a total of about 8 minutes for the entire series. And that pretty much tells the story. Kevin Durant, who missed a good portion of the late regular season, is coming back. They're reintegrating him into the offense. He scored 17 in Game 1. He scored 25 in Game 2, and then an outburst on Saturday night with 38. So it'll be interesting to see how he can get going. And I think that with Curry and Clay struggling in Game 3 a little bit, not really knocking down as many shots, having Durant get going is just indicative of what sort of weapons Golden State brings to the table. So yeah, they can beat you with Klay Thompson, or they can beat you with Steph Curry, or they can beat you with Draymond Green, who's doing a little bit of everything. And then to add on to that, Kevin Durant, one of the 5 best basketball players in the world, when he starts to play well. And their defense has been unreal. That's the underrated part, and I plan on delving into that this week. We're going to talk about Golden State's defense and how it's the unsung hero. Nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to talk about their scores, but their defense has just been unbelievable. They really limit the opportunities for guys like Gordon Hayward. James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, they sort of prey on these wing players and force them into terrible games. So that'll be something maybe I'll get into and explore later this week in a column. But other than that, what do you say about this series? Utah's played pretty well, which I think is also indicative of how good Golden State is. They've gotten good play from Gobert. They've gotten good play from Hayward. Their 2 stars are performing, and they're just getting beat just because they get outgunned in every series. But Gobert had a 16-16 in Game 2. He had a 21-15 in Game 3. And then 33 points from Hayward, 29 points and 6 assists from Hayward in Game 3. So the production's there. It's just not resulting in wins, which is unfortunate for Utah, who has another interesting offseason coming up, something that we'll talk about later. But anyway, hit that 30-minute mark. That's about where I want to be every week. So hopefully you made it all the way through. I made it all the way through. You don't know how many retakes it took to get here, but thank you for listening to the inaugural And One Analytics podcast. Keep you in the loop. I'll tweet these things out. I'll let you know where you can listen and when you can listen, because I'm still exploring my SoundCloud, YouTube avenues so that I have all these recorded and can have access to them. But anyway, thanks for listening. We'll see you later this week, hopefully with a guest.